let's go back to the summer of 2018. Everyone was watching the royal wedding, listening to Drake, and using our last few months of MoviePass before it went under to go see Tag. Directed by first-timer Jeff Tomsic, this movie features a well-known cast from both movies and television and tells the true story of a group of friends who have been playing the same game of Tag for 30 years. Yep, that's literally the whole premise of the movie. Seeing how it performed averaged to good numbers at the box office with a less than desirable critic and audience score all around, it seems like the consensus is that this movie is, well, just fine. So why was it not that great? Part of my theory is that it was a standalone movie and did not connect to the rest of the childhood game cinematic universe, but after digging more, I came across a theory that I cannot leave my brain. The theory is that Hannibal Buress was not in the original filming of this movie. This theory comes from Larbur33, I think, and it's pretty much exactly how it sounds. Hannibal Buress wasn't in the movie. Instead, they filmed the movie, and after playing it for a test audience, realized they needed more jokes in the movie. So essentially, I want to take this video to look into the claims, was Hannibal Buress actually in the original filming of the movie Tag? And yes, I never thought I'd be making a video essay about this subject. So after skipping through scenes of this movie, because I obviously wasn't going to watch the whole thing again, it seemed possible. Take this scene at the wedding party, for example. It feels awkward.
I mean, Jerry's worse than all of you. He's very competitive.
When we were kids, we had a contest to see who could hold their breath for the longest underwater. He almost died. He won, but at what cost, really?
Oh, I hope he's this competitive when it comes to being a father.
Are you pregnant? Really?
That's Shirley Temple.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
Cheers.
Cheers.
That's great.
Thank you.
His jokes in this scene, and with many other scenes in the movie, just seem kind of added on. They're not really connected to anything else the characters are saying. It's just kind of a one-off joke that's on top of what these characters are already saying to each other. And on top of that, the placement of his character just feels fake, like he wouldn't be standing there. And throughout the entire movie, you can see other scenes that are like this, where it's very possible to believe he was just put on a green screen to be added to this movie. Even in interviews promoting this movie, he doesn't have a great answer for why his character even exists.
Everybody's got a character that's got a bit, so we could all just play our bit and together it all worked. But there was nothing forced about it.
Hannibal, what's your bit?
My bit is just say the words until they say you did enough.
No, I meant your character's bit, not your job as an actor.
Oh, that was the character's bit too.
So I decided to do some research if there could possibly be any truth to this. And unfortunately, within about 20 minutes of finding YouTube videos of this movie, there was a behind the scenes footage of the filming of Tag. That is honestly somehow more awkward than the movie itself. So it's probably safe to assume that he was indeed in the initial filming of this movie. But why then does this feel all so real? This is when I started to dig a little deeper to see why this movie didn't work for me as a comedy. So thanks to the website tvtropes.org, I was able to classify exactly my thoughts on why this movie doesn't work. When it comes to comedy movies, there's several different tropes that the movie can take, especially revolving around a group of individuals. The reason that Hannibal Buress doesn't work is that this movie is supposed to follow the grouping of 4 people, but it adds him, making him the 5th. Now, the idea of a 4-person comedy movie comes from several different philosophies. The first one I want to explain is the Philosophy Ensemble. The descriptions of the characters include the cynic, the optimist, the realist, and the apathetic. Now, a lot of these are pretty self-explained, but the cynic is the one who just doesn't really care too much about what's going on. He's kind of just like there for the ride. In this case, it'd be Jeremy Renner. He's not particularly interested in the game of tag. He is because he's winning, but he's definitely the most disconnected from the rest of the group. The optimist would be Ed Helms in this situation, the one who wants to keep this alive, the one that's desperate, grasping for every chance he can to keep this group together, and he wants this game to work. John Hamm would play the realist in this situation, and while it doesn't fall perfectly within this movie, his character does represent a lot of those characteristics of just trying to live in the real world. He's the most successful of the group, and he's just kind of here for the ride, but understands the real life ramifications of playing this game. And Jake Johnson's an apathetic, which is his character in most of his things he plays, but in this movie particularly, he's along for the ride. Another theory that I feel like is more reasonable for this movie is the four-man band. Now in this one, the characters are the only sane man, the smart guy, the Casanova wannabe, and the butt monkey. And I did not come up with these terms. This is again from tvtropes.org. Blame them for the poor titles. And maybe these roles go without saying again, but I'll just explain them. The only sane man would go to Jeremy Renner, who is, well, the only sane one. He kind of lives in the real world where the rest of these guys are just trying to play a game of tag. Ed Helms would represent the smart guy. He's the one with a plan. He's the kind of leader in some ways, which I'll get to later, but he's the one who is formulating this group and coming up with a plan of how they are going to get Jeremy Renner back into their group. John Hamm would represent the Casanova wannabe, and typically this role is someone who is more driven by, oh, how do I say it? A womanizer. He wants girls. He's very sexual in nature. And in this situation, it doesn't really fit the bill, but I do think it does work if you look at it in success. With his job, he's the most successful, he's very wealthy, and so I do think he has this drive of trying to be something that he maybe isn't. And Jake Johnson's the butt monkey, which is pretty self-explainable. I will not go into any more details about that. So big surprise, a lot of your favorite comedies probably fall into these tropes. What's the big deal? And I'm all for trying new things, going outside the box, looking at other ways that we can produce comedic films. But if something is successful, it's kind of dangerous to stray away from it. Now, if we're looking at movies that fit this description of four individuals, there's a lot that come to mind. All the way back from Caddyshack, you got Jumanji, Ghostbusters, Hot Tub Time Machine, Anchorman, even Wild Hogs. Girls Trip is a kind of a mix-up on that, including an all-female cast, but we've even seen a trend in that direction. But the one that I want to talk about the most is The Hangover. And not just because Ed Helms is in both movies, but I do think that The Hangover is the best representation and how we should be comparing this movie.
Am I missing a tooth?
Oh. Whose baby is that?
Check its collar or something.
Interesting thing about The Hangover is that while it is technically a four-man band, for the majority of the movie, it turns into a comic trio, which is not uncommon in these types of movies. Typically, the way this goes is the four-man band shifts into a comic trio, with the three roles being the leader, the fool, and the only sane man. The other interesting thing about this is that when these roles shift, it's not always the same character that takes on this new role. For example, Jeremy Renner's obviously the only sane man originally, but now it's a comic trio and he's not considered to be in this trio. He's no longer has that title. Within The Hangover, the original grouping would be Doug as the only sane man. You have Phil, who is the smart guy. Ed Helms, again, would be the Casanova wannabe, which doesn't particularly fit the bill, but in essence it does. And then, obviously, without question, Alan is the butt monkey. So since the majority of the Hangover movie, Doug is not present, the only sane man now goes to Stu. Phil becomes the leader and Alan becomes the fool. And the reason this works so well comparing it to Tag is because Tag should operate the same way. With Jeremy Renner not being present a large part of the movie, this should be a comic trio with Ed Helms, John Hamm, and Jake Johnson. But Hannibal Buress is just added on, and like I mentioned earlier, he doesn't even know what his character's role is within this movie. First movies that I came across while looking into comedy movies that have 5 people within a group was Grownups. So Grownups is one of many polarizing films on Rotten Tomatoes, as you can see, with a 10% tomato meter but a 62% audience score. So essentially, if you're looking for a movie with meaning and art and Oscar love, I guess this movie isn't it. However, audiences, for the most part, enjoy it. I think the difference with Grownups, though, is this is a cast of people you grew up with. This is a reunion, in a sense, with Kevin James added. And the problem is Tag doesn't give you that. Tag isn't this group of friends that you love watching their chemistry together. Think about it. You have probably the second least favorite Avenger with Don Draper, a very polarizing character from The Office, Nick from New Girl, and then the sidekick to the Eric Andre show. These 5 people definitely aren't known for their chemistry together, and so it's messy, it's difficult, it just doesn't fully work, and I can understand why people think this movie is charming, and I don't want to just criticize it completely. My point is, it is very believable that Hannibal Buress was just added to this movie without much thought to it. Perhaps this comes from a director's first time movie and it doesn't look like he's doing much else right now. Perhaps it comes from this really odd concept of a plot, which just doesn't feel like it could fit into a movie. But my theory is that, again, this just doesn't fall into the rest of the childhood game cinematic universe. So we need to see this connect to those movies. So yeah, that's essentially it. That's why Tag didn't work for me, and that's why it's pretty easy to believe that Hannibal Buress wasn't in the original filming of this movie. But I'm still a believer, so Hannibal, if you're out there, let me know what you think, if you were in the movie or not. Once again, please tag this like button, subscribe if you like more content like this, and I will see you next time.